The air in the briefing room at Bagram Airfield was thick enough to taste, a stale mix of recycled oxygen, nervous sweat, and the faint metallic tang of ozone from the humming servers that lined the walls. It was a temporary world, a sterile bubble of fluorescent light and climate control dropped into the rugged, unforgiving mountains of Afghanistan. For Captain Eva Rostova, call sign Valkyrie, it was a familiar purgatory. She sat near the back, a lone Air Force blue uniform in a sea of Navy AOR-1 camouflage, her posture a study in relaxed tension. Her flight suit was worn, the fabric softened from countless hours strapped into the cockpit of her A-10 Thunderbolt II, an aircraft affectionately and appropriately known as the Warthog. Eva was a pilot, and a damn good one, but in this room, she was an outsider. The men of SEAL Team 6, DevGru's elite, carried themselves with an aura of quiet lethality that bordered on arrogance. They were the tip of the spear, the surgical instrument of American foreign policy, and they rarely worked with outsiders, especially not with A-10 pilots. They preferred the sleek, fast-moving F-16s or the silent, hovering Apaches, aircraft that matched their own self-image. The Warthog was, in their eyes, a relic. A slow, ugly, brutally effective flying tank, but a tank nonetheless. It lacked finesse. It was a sledgehammer in a world that they believed required a scalpel. At the head of the room, Lieutenant Commander Marcus Thorne, call sign Reaper, stood before a massive digital map of the Hindu Kush. Thorne was the platonic ideal of a SEAL commander, tall, chiseled, with eyes that seemed to see right through you, weighing and judging your worth in a single, cold glance. He moved with an economy of motion that spoke of immense controlled power. When he spoke, his voice was a low, gravelly rumble that commanded attention. The asset is Dr. Eris Thorne, a Pakistani nuclear physicist who has been feeding us intel. On a rogue uranium enrichment program for the last 18 months, Thorne began, his laser pointer circling a fortified compound deep in a valley that was little more than a jagged scar on the map. He was compromised 72 hours ago. The local warlord, a man named Gul Zaman, is holding him. We have a 24-hour window before Zaman sells him to the highest bidder, likely the Iranians or the North Koreans. Losing that intel is not an option. Losing the man who holds it is even worse. He clicked a button, and the image zoomed in, showing thermal satellite photos of the compound. It was a medieval-looking fortress, stone and mud brick, but bristling with modern weaponry. DSHK heavy machine gun nests, multiple RPG teams, and what looked like at least one Zu-23-2 anti-aircraft gun. Intel suggests Zaman's forces number between 60 and 80 fighters, well-armed and familiar with the terrain. The valley is a natural kill box. The approaches are narrow, heavily mined, and watched around the clock. Infiltration will be difficult. Exfiltration, he paused, his eyes sweeping the room, will be next to impossible. His gaze fell on Eva, and a flicker of something, annoyance, perhaps dismissal, crossed his features. He gestured vaguely in her direction. Air support will be provided by a flight of A-10s, call sign Hog Flight. They'll be on station for close air support, should we need it. The words, should we need it, were laced with skepticism, as if the very idea was a remote, almost laughable contingency. One of the SEALs, a broad-shouldered operator with a thick beard, chuckled under his breath. A-10s? What are we going to do? Ask the enemy to hold still while we drop a bus on them? A few quiet snickers rippled through the SEALs. Eva's jaw tightened, but she kept her expression neutral. She'd heard it all before. The jokes about the Warthogs, speed, its looks, its age. They didn't understand the plane. They didn't understand what it could do. They saw a slow mover. She saw the most durable and lethal close air support platform ever built. They saw an ugly beast. She saw a guardian angel with a 7-barreled cannon that fired 3,900 rounds a minute. Thorne didn't silence the laughter. He let it hang in the air for a moment before continuing. The plan is simple. We go in fast and hard. 2 MH-60s will insert us on this ridge. He indicated a spot 2 kilometers from the compound, under the cover of darkness. We move to the objective, breach the west wall, grab the asset, and get to the extraction point here. He pointed to a dry riverbed on the opposite side of the valley. Total time on target, 20 minutes. Air support will remain at a holding pattern 10 miles out. We maintain strict radio silence until we are clear of the immediate threat zone. We do this clean and quiet. No fireworks, no warthogs tearing up the landscape unless things go completely sideways. Are we clear? A chorus of hoo-yah echoed from the SEALs. Eva simply nodded. She knew her role. She was the emergency plan, the in case of fire break glass option. It stung, but it was the job. As the briefing broke, the SEALs gathered their gear, a quiet hum of deadly purpose filling the room. Eva stood and made her way towards Thorn. She needed to confirm the ingress and egress routes, the frequencies. For their encrypted comms, the kill boxes she was authorized to engage in if the worst happened. "Lieutenant Commander," she said, her voice calm and professional. Thorn turned, his expression impatient. "Captain, I need to confirm the coordinates for your planned exfil route. The satellite imagery shows a series of potential ambush points along that riverbed. If you get into trouble, I need to know where your blind spots are." Thorn crossed his arms, looking down at her. He was a good foot taller, a wall of muscle and gear. "Captain, my team has been operating in environments like this since you were in flight school. We are very, very good at not getting into trouble. You just keep your flying bus out of my airspace and let us do our job. We'll call you if we need a crater made. Otherwise, enjoy the view." He turned his back on her, dismissing her as if she were a flight attendant asking if he wanted another drink. The insult was clear, sharp, and public. Eva felt a hot flush of anger creep up her neck, but she forced it down. Emotion had no place here. Professionalism was her armor. "With all due respect, Commander," she said, her voice firm, making him turn back. "My job isn't to enjoy the view. It's to make sure your men come home, all of them. That means I need to know every variable, your plan, your routes, your contingencies. My flying bus is the most effective tool this Air Force has for saving ground troops in a jam, but it's only as good as the information I have. So I'll ask you again, where are your potential blind spots?" For a long moment, Thorn just stared at her. The air crackled with tension. The other SEALs had fallen silent, watching the exchange. Eva didn't flinch. She met his cold gaze with her own steady, determined one. She had spent her entire career fighting for respect, in the male-dominated halls of the Air Force Academy, in the competitive world of fighter pilots, and now, in this room. She wasn't about to back down. Finally, with a sigh that was pure theater, Thorn uncrossed his arms. "Fine." He turned to the map. "Here, here, and here," he said, tapping 3 points on the screen with curt, angry jabs. "Potential crossfire zones. Now, if you're done questioning my operational planning, Captain, my team and I have a mission to prepare for." He walked away, without another word. Eva stood there for a second, memorizing the coordinates, burning them into her brain. She had the information she needed, but the exchange left a bitter taste in her mouth. It wasn't just professional disagreement. It was personal. He didn't just doubt her aircraft. He doubted her. 6 hours later, Ava was in the cockpit of the Duchess, her A-10. The setting sun painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, casting long, dark shadows across the sprawling Bagram base. Her pre-flight checks were complete. The twin General Electric engines whined, eager to be unleashed. Under her wings, a formidable arsenal hung ready. Maverick missiles, 500-pound laser-guided bombs, and of course, 1,074 rounds of 30mm armor-piercing incendiary ammunition for the Jawade Avenger. She was a flying ordnance depot, and she knew how to use every last piece of it. Her wingman, Captain Mike Rodeo Santini, gave her a thumbs up from his own warthog. "Ready to go babysit the cool kids, Valkyrie?" he crackled over the radio, his tone light but with an undercurrent of the same frustration she felt. "Just another day at the office, Rodeo," she replied, her voice betraying none of her inner turmoil. "Let's get it done. Hog flight, check in." As they taxied onto the runway, the final rays of sunlight disappeared behind the mountains, plunging the world into a deep, inky blackness. The two MH-60s carrying Thorn's team had lifted off 10 minutes earlier, their dark shapes melting into the night. Eva's mission was simple: get to the holding pattern, a lonely circle in the sky 10 miles from the target, and wait, for a call that Thorne was sure would never come. They took off with a deafening roar, the heavy planes lumbering into the air before climbing with surprising grace towards their assigned altitude. Below, the rugged terrain of Afghanistan passed by, a monochrome landscape of jagged peaks and deep valleys visible only through her night vision goggles. For 40 minutes, the flight was routine. They reached the holding pattern and began their slow, lazy circles. The radio was silent, just the low hum of the secure channel. Eva's eyes scanned her instruments, her mind replaying the briefing, the map, Thorne's arrogant dismissal. Something felt off. The intelligence on the compound was too neat, the plan too simple. The darkness on the ridge was absolute, a thick, starless blanket that swallowed light and sound. Lieutenant Commander Thorne moved through it with the practiced silence of a predator. His team, 5 of the most highly trained operators in the world, followed in his shadow, each man a ghost in the landscape. They had done this 100 times before. The quiet infiltration, the patient observation, the swift, violent conclusion. It was a rhythm, a deadly dance they knew by heart. From their vantage point, the compound below was a collection of dark, sleeping shapes. The thermal scope on Thorne's rifle painted a different picture. A handful of sentries on the walls, a few more huddled around a small fire in the courtyard. Exactly as the intel had predicted. Too exactly. A sliver of unease pricked at the back of Thorne's mind, a quiet voice that whispered of traps and hubris. He silenced it. Confidence was a weapon, doubt was a liability. "Alpha team on me. Bravo! You have Overwatch," he murmured into his throat mic. "We go on my mark. 3, 2, 1, mark." They moved down the scree slope like water flowing over rock, silent and inexorable. They reached the base of the west wall, the designated breach point. 2 of his men placed a small, frame-shaped charge against the mud brick. The rest fanned, out, weapons up, scanning the silent walls. "Breach in 5, someone whispered. The countdown was a lifetime. 4, 3, 2. The world didn't erupt in the controlled, focused blast of their breaching charge. It exploded in a blinding, deafening cataclysm of light and sound that came from everywhere at once. The ground heaved. The air was torn apart by the roar of a dozen heavy machine guns opening up simultaneously. Searchlights blazed to life, pinning them against the wall like insects on a board. Green tracers from the DSAK nests crisscrossed, the air above them a lethal web of incandescent steel. "Ambush! We're in a kill box!" someone screamed over the comms. The professional calm of the SEALs shattered in an instant. It was a perfectly coordinated trap. The sentries they'd seen were bait. The real force had been hidden, dug in, waiting for them to be perfectly positioned with no cover and no escape. RPGs slammed into the ground around them, showering them with rock and dirt. "Fall back! Fall! Back to the rocks!" Thorne roared, his mind racing, trying to process the sheer scale of the disaster. Their intel hadn't just been wrong, it had been a fabrication. This wasn't a warlord's ramshackle fortress. This was a sophisticated, multi-layered defensive position. They scrambled back, firing blindly at the muzzle flashes on the walls, but it was hopeless. They were caught in a 3-sided crossfire. One of his men, a young operator named Patch, went down, a burst of heavy machine gun fire nearly cutting him in half. Another, their breacher, screamed as an RPG blast threw him against the wall, his legs twisted at unnatural angles. "Man down! 2 men down!" Thorne dragged Patch's body behind a small outcropping of rock that offered pathetic cover. There was nothing he could do. The kid's eyes were open, staring blankly at the chaotic sky. He felt a rage so pure and cold it burned. "Where is our air support?" His second in command, a seasoned operator named Gator, yelled, pressing himself into the dirt as bullets ricocheted off the rocks above his head. "Call in the warthogs!" Thorne fumbled for his radio, his hands slick with Patch's blood. Hog 1, this is Reaper. We are compromised. I repeat, we are in a catastrophic ambush. Need immediate close air support. Danger close. We are taking heavy fire from all sides. He waited for the calm, professional voice of the A-10 pilot to respond. He waited for the reassurance that help was on the way. All he got was static. Hog 1, do you copy? He screamed into the mic, his voice raw with desperation. Valkyrie, goddammit, where are you? The silence that answered him was more terrifying than the gunfire. They were alone. The pilot, the woman he had dismissed with such arrogance, was gone. The flying bus he had mocked was their only chance of survival, and it wasn't there. The realization hit him like a physical blow. They had been sent here to die. 15 miles away, Eva Rostova was banking her A-10 into a steep dive. Below her, 3 Toyota Hilux trucks, each with a heavy machine gun mounted in the back, were racing down a dusty desert road. The convoy. The priority target. Rodeo, I'll take the lead vehicle. You take the rear. Middle one is mine on the second pass, she said, her voice a mask of calm over the storm of anxiety raging within her. Copy, Valkyrie. Gun's hot. She lined up her attack run, the heads-up display glowing green in front of her. The garbled transmission from the SEALs echoed in her mind. Ambush! Need immediate fire! The sudden activation of the enemy air defenses confirmed it. The convoy was a ghost, a diversion. The real fight, the one that mattered, was happening in that valley, and she was flying in the wrong direction. The F-16s were still 17 minutes out. Sky Eye, this is Hog 1, she said, her voice tight with controlled fury. That SEAL team is in the middle of a mass casualty event. I need to break off this engagement and support them now. Negative, Hog 1, the voice from command replied, maddeningly calm. Your orders stand. Neutralize the convoy. The F-16s are en route to support Operation Nightfall. They don't have time for the F-16s to get there. They are being slaughtered, Eva yelled. Protocol be damned. Captain, you will follow your orders or you will be grounded for the rest of your career. Do you understand me? Eva's finger hovered over the trigger. Below her, the lead truck grew larger in her sights. She could destroy it. She could follow her orders, protect her career, and live with the knowledge that she let 6 men die because of a command that stank of incompetence or something far, far worse. She thought of Thorne's arrogant face, his dismissive words. It would be easy to let her anger make the decision for her. But then she thought of the other men, the ones who were now fighting for their lives, trusting that the sky held a guardian angel. They didn't care about inter-service rivalries or a commander's bruised ego. They just needed help. Rodeo, she said, her voice low and steady. To hell with this. Couldn't agree more, Valkyrie, her wingman replied without hesitation. She pulled. Back on the stick, aborting the attack run at the last second. The truck sped on, its crew oblivious to how close they had just come to annihilation. She ignored the furious sputtering from the command channel, the threats and the orders to turn back. She simply switched frequencies, cutting them off. Rodeo, form on me. We're going back, she commanded. I'm right behind you. She threw the A-10 into a turn so hard the G-forces pressed her deep into her seat, the airframe groaning in protest. She pushed the throttles to their maximum, coaxing every ounce of speed from the powerful engines. The Warthog wasn't fast, but it was determined. And right now, it was flying with a purpose that transcended speed. Her mind was a whirlwind of calculations, fuel consumption, time to target, ordnance load. The SEALs were in a valley. That meant a steep ingress, limited maneuverability, and intense, concentrated ground fire. The newly activated anti-aircraft systems were a death sentence for most planes. But the A-10 wasn't most planes. It was built to absorb punishment, to fly with one engine, half a tail, and a cockpit full of holes. It was built for exactly this kind of fight. Reaper, this is Valkyrie on emergency guard, she broadcast, hoping her signal could cut through the chaos. If you can hear me, pop smoke. I am inbound. Hot. ETA 2 minutes. There was no reply. As she cleared the last ridgeline and the target valley opened up before her, she saw why. The scene below was a vision from hell. The entire valley floor was lit up by muzzle flashes, explosions, and the burning wreckage of the SEALs' insertion helicopters, which must have been shot down on approach. The handful of surviving SEALs were pinned behind a few scattered rocks, completely surrounded and systematically being picked apart, and the sky was full of fire. The ZU-23-2 she'd seen in the satellite photos was just the beginning. There were, at least 3 of them, spitting streams of red tracers into the air. But there was something else, too. Something worse. Her threat receiver screamed a new, more urgent warning. It was the distinct electronic signature of a Strela 2 missile system, a shoulder-fired, heat-seeking man-pads. Several of them. Flying into that valley was suicide. Her training, her orders, every rational thought told her to pull up, to wait. For the F-16s, to wait for SEAD, suppression of enemy air defenses, support. But down below, amidst the explosions, she saw a flicker of green. Green smoke. One of the SEALs had heard her. It was a desperate plea, an act of pure, unadulterated faith. Faith in her. Faith in her warthog. Thorne, huddled behind his rock, watched the green smoke curl into the air. He had heard her. Valkyrie, inbound, hot. It was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. He risked a look at the sky, praying. There's nothing. Up there, Gator croaked, his voice hoarse from yelling. She's not coming. She's coming, Thorne said, though his own hope was dwindling with every passing second. Eva took a deep breath, her world narrowing to the glowing green instruments. In front of her and the maelstrom of fire waiting below. She couldn't take out all the threats at once. She had to prioritize. She had to fly through the storm to save the men on the ground. Rodeo, you stay high. Draw their fire. I'm going in, she commanded. Valkyrie, that's a death trap, he yelled. Back. They're already dead if I don't, she replied, her voice eerily calm. The cockpit of the Duchess was a cacophony of screaming alarms and flashing lights. Red and amber warnings lit up the console like a hellish Christmas tree. Master caution. Engine fire. Hydraulic failure. Eva ignored them. Her focus was absolute, narrowed to a single point, the ZU-23-2 anti-aircraft gun spitting a torrent of 23mm shells at her. The crew of the gun, their faces illuminated by their own muzzle flashes, looked up at her with expressions of disbelief and terror. They had never seen a plane attack them like this, a direct suicidal charge from the heavens. For the men on the ground, the sight was even more surreal. One moment, they were facing certain death, pinned down by an overwhelming force. The next, the sky itself seemed to tear open. The A-10 didn't fly into the valley. It fell into it, a winged beast of vengeance, seemingly impervious to the storm of fire being thrown at it. Holy, Gator breathed, his words lost in the sudden, earth-shattering roar that filled the valley. It wasn't the sound of a jet engine. It was something deeper, more primal. It was the sound of the GAU-8 Avenger cannon firing for the first time. BART! The sound was a physical force, a tangible wave of pressure that vibrated in Thorne's bones. It was a sound that ripped the air to shreds, a stream of 30mm depleted uranium shells, each the size of a milk bottle, erased the ZU-23-2 from existence. The gun, the crew, the sandbagged emplacement, it all vanished in a cloud of dust, smoke, and shrapnel. Eva pulled back hard on the stick, the G-forces, crushing her into her seat as she leveled out of the dive just a few hundred feet above the valley floor. The warthog, grievously wounded but still flying, screamed over the SEALs' heads. They could see the holes riddling its fuselage, the smoke trailing from its left engine. Valkyrie is on station. She grunted into the radio, her voice strained. From the Gs. Call my targets, Reaper! Thorne, stunned into momentary silence by the sheer violence of her arrival, shook himself back to action. Valkyrie, good to hear your voice. We have multiple RPG teams on the eastern ridge, coordinates 0907. Copy, Eva said. Engaging. She banked the sluggish, damaged plane, lining up her next run. The remaining anti-aircraft guns were... still firing at her, their tracers zipping past her canopy. She was a huge, slow target, and they knew it. But she was also a distraction. Every gun pointed at her was a gun not pointed at the SEALs. "Rodeo, you see that second ZU-23 on the south wall?" she called to her wingman. "I see it, I can't get." "A clean shot without flying into the same meat grinder you're in," he replied, his voice tight with worry. "You don't have to. Just make them think you're coming in." "Keep their heads down," she ordered. "Copy that. Faking the funk." Rodeo's A-10 dipped its nose, feinting a dive. Immediately, the gun crews on the south wall swung their barrels towards him, giving Eva the opening she needed. She rolled in on the eastern ridge, this time unleashing a pair of Maverick missiles. The missiles streaked from their rails, two brilliant points of light that slammed into the ridge with devastating accuracy. The rocks where the RPG teams had been hiding erupted in fire and smoke. "Good hits! Good hits!" Thorne yelled into the radio. "Targets destroyed!" But the enemy was adapting. They had been prepared for an air attack, just not one this insane. Now, the men with the shoulder-fired Strela missiles, the man-pads, were coming out of their hiding spots. Eva's threat receiver lit up again. "Missile. Launch! Missile launch! Valkyrie, breaking left!" she yelled, yanking the control stick and deploying a cloud of flares, brilliant magnesium decoys designed to fool the missile's heat-seeking guidance system. The missile, confused, veered off and exploded harmlessly against the valley wall. She had survived the first one. But there were more. "Reaper, I need those man-pads teams taken out now, or I'm a sitting duck up here," she said, her breath coming, in ragged gasps. "We see two of them. One near the main gate, another in that watchtower," Thorne responded, directing his men's fire. The SEALs, emboldened by her presence, were now laying down a withering field of suppressive fire. "We can't get a clean shot." "I can," Eva said grimly. She ignored the third ZU-23 that was still hammering her plane and lined up on the watchtower. This was a job for the gun. She swooped in low, the warthog's shadow passing over the battlefield like the hand of death. Brrrt! The wooden watchtower disintegrated as if it were made of matchsticks. "That's one down," she grunted. She jinked hard, another Strela missile screaming past her cockpit, this one so close she could feel the heat of its rocket motor. Her left engine, already damaged, was now sputtering, belching black smoke. The fire warning light was no longer flashing. It was a solid, angry red. "Engine 1 is failing," she reported, her voice still impossibly calm. "Shutting it down." She went through the emergency procedure, cutting fuel to the port engine. The plane yawed violently, but the A-10 was designed for this. The remaining engine was powerful enough to keep it in the air. Barely. On the ground, Thorne watched in awe. She was flying a crippled plane on one engine through a curtain of anti-aircraft fire, and she was single-handedly turning the tide of the battle. Every pass she made, another enemy position was silenced. She was a force of nature, a terrifying, beautiful angel of destruction. His earlier arrogance felt like a distant, shameful memory. He had called her plane a bus. He had been a fool. This was the chariot of a war god. "The main gate, Valkyrie," he urged. "Last man-pads team is at the main gate." "On it," she replied. This run would be the most dangerous yet. It would take her directly over the heart of the compound, right into the teeth of the last active ZU-23. There was no other way. She took a deep breath and pushed the nose down one more time. The world became a blur of speed and noise and tracer. Fire. The ZU-23 crew knew this was their last chance. They poured everything they had at the charging warthog. Shells ripped through her right wing, shredding the metal, severing hydraulic lines. The controls became heavy, sluggish. It felt like she was trying to fly a brick, but the Duchess held together. It was a stubborn, magnificent beast. She lined up the shot, her thumb pressing down on the trigger. The gun spoke its final furious word of the night. The main gate and the missile team standing beside it were obliterated. A cheer went up from the SEALs. The tide had turned. The relentless pressure was off. The enemy was broken, their heavy weapons silenced, their command structure in chaos. Eva, however, had no time to celebrate. As she pulled up from her last gun run, a new terrifying sound filled her cockpit. It was a high-pitched, steady tone. A lock-on tone. It wasn't Estrella. This was different. More advanced. More lethal. Her screen flashed a new warning, one she had only ever seen in simulations. SA-13 Gopher. Radar lock. Down in the courtyard of the compound, a section of the ground had slid away, revealing a hidden bunker. Rising from it was a mobile tracked vehicle with a turret mounting 4 missile canisters. It was a sophisticated, short-range air defense system, something that had no business being in a warlord's fortress in the middle of Afghanistan. This wasn't a trap. It was an execution, planned with military precision, and she was the last target. "Reaper, they have a Gopher!" she screamed into the radio. "They have a goddamn SA-13! Before Thorne could even process what she had said, she saw the flash. A missile leaped from the launcher, accelerating with incredible speed, a plume of white smoke trailing behind it. It wasn't heat-seeking. It was radar-guided. Flares wouldn't work. The missile was locked onto her. Her plane was crippled, flying on one engine and barely maneuverable. Evasion was impossible. The SEALs on the ground watched in horror, the joy of their salvation turning to ash in their mouths. They saw the missile streak towards the smoking A-10, a silver needle stitching a path straight to its heart. There was no escape. The lock-on tone in Eva's cockpit was a death sentence set to music, a steady, high-pitched shriek that meant the SA-13's radar had her painted. The missile was in the air, a rapidly closing point of light on her heads-up display. In the cold calculus of aerial combat, this was a checkmate. Her plane was too damaged, the missile too fast, too sophisticated. Her training manuals had a procedure for this. Eject. But her eyes flicked down to the men on the ground. The SEALs. They were no longer pinned down. They were moving, fighting back, but they weren't clear yet. The SA-13 launcher was still active. If she ejected, it would turn its attention to the extraction helicopters that would eventually have to come for them. She had started this. She had to finish it. "Rodeo, get out of here!" she ordered her wingman, her voice devoid of panic. It was the voice of a pilot who had accepted her fate but was still flying the plane. "Get clear of the threat ring." Like hell. "I'm with you, Valkyrie," Rodeo shot back, his own plane circling high above the valley, a helpless spectator. "That's an order, Mike," she said, using his real name for the first time in the air. "Get the F-16s a clean picture of this valley. Get these guys out of here." There was a moment of silence, then a choked, "Copy, Eva. Godspeed." Eva's mind was a supercomputer, processing dozens of variables in a fraction of a second. Speed, altitude, trajectory, countermeasures. The missile was closing, 3 seconds to impact. She did the only thing she could. She slammed the control stick forward and to the right, throwing the crippled Warthog into a violent rolling dive aimed directly at the SA-13 launcher. If she was going to die, she was taking the threat with her. It was a move of pure, calculated insanity. The missile, guided by its radar, adjusted its course to follow her. The G-forces were immense, the damaged airframe screaming in protest. Warning lights she didn't even know existed flashed on her console. The plane was literally coming apart around her, 2 seconds to impact. On the ground, Thorne watched, his heart in his throat. He saw what she was doing. She was drawing the missile down, forcing it to follow her into the ground. It was a sacrifice. She was trading her life for theirs. "She's not gonna make it," Gator whispered, his voice filled with awe and horror. The missile was just feet from her tail. Ava could see it in her mirrors, a malevolent spark of light. 1 second. At the last possible moment, with the nose of her plane pointed at the ground and the missile about to strike, Ava did something that wasn't in any flight manual. It was an instinct, a desperate gamble born of 1,000 hours in the air. She hit the emergency flare deploy button, not to decoy the missile. It was useless against radar, but for the violent, explosive push it would give the aircraft. Simultaneously, she stomped on the left rudder pedal with all her strength and yanked the control stick back and to the left. It was a brutal, aerodynamically catastrophic maneuver. The explosive force of the flares popping off her right side, combined with the sudden, violent rudder and stick input, threw the A-10 into a flat, unrecoverable spin. But for a fraction of a second, it also caused the plane to skid sideways in the air. It was just enough. The SA-13, anticipating her trajectory, didn't have time to correct. It screamed past her cockpit, missing her by what felt like inches, and slammed into the valley wall behind her. The explosion was massive, a brilliant, orange fireball that lit up the entire canyon. Eva, however, was now in a new kind of trouble. The Duchess was tumbling end over end, falling out of the sky like a thrown stone. The spin was too fast, the altitude too low. The one remaining engine, starved of proper airflow, choked and flamed out. Now she was a glider, a 30,000-pound brick, with wings, and the ground was rushing up to meet her. "Mayday, mayday, mayday," she said into the radio, her voice calm, almost conversational. "Hog 1 is going down. I am attempting to eject." She reached for the yellow and black striped handles of the ejection seat. She had a split second to get out. From the ground, the SEALs watched in stunned silence. They had seen the impossible maneuver, the missile missing its target. For a heartbeat, they thought she had done it, that she had survived. But then they saw the plane begin to tumble, falling uncontrollably. "She's out of control! She's going in!" The A-10, spinning wildly, disappeared behind a high, jagged ridge at the edge of the valley. For a moment, there was silence. A horrible, pregnant pause. Then, the world turned white. A massive explosion, far bigger than the missile's impact, erupted from behind the ridge. A column of fire and thick, black smoke billowed hundreds of feet into the night sky, a funeral pyre for a warrior, and her chariot. The silence that followed was profound. The battle was over. The enemy was broken. But the cost was staggering. Thorne sank to one knee, the radio handset feeling heavy and useless in his hand. He stared at the column of smoke, his face a mask of shock and grief. He had sent her away. He had mocked her. And she had come back, flown through the gates of hell for him and his men, and paid the ultimate price. The weight of his guilt was a physical thing, crushing the air from his lungs. "Is she—" Gator started to ask, but he couldn't finish the sentence. No one could survive that. The radio crackled. It was Rodeo, her wingman. His voice was thick, with emotion. "Sky Eye, this is Hog 2. I have a visual on the crash site. No parachute sighted. I repeat, no shoot." The words hung in the cold night air. No shoot. She hadn't gotten out. Thorne closed his eyes. He saw her face in the briefing room, her steady, defiant gaze. "My job isn't to enjoy the view. It's to make sure your men come home." She had done her job. He had failed in his. He had let his ego, his prejudice, put them all in a position where her sacrifice was the only thing that could save them. The victory felt hollow, a bitter, terrible thing. He opened his eyes and looked at his surviving men. They were battered, bloody, but they were alive. Because of her. "Reaper, this is Sky." "Aye." The command channel came to life, the same voice that had ordered Eva away. "The F-16s are on station. We have a CSR, Combat Search and Rescue team, inbound for your position. Sit tight." Thorne picked up his radio. His voice, when he spoke, was a low, dangerous growl. "Sky Eye, this is Reaper. Cancel the CSR for my position. Divert them to the A-10 crash site. Now." "Negative, Reaper. The pilot is confirmed KIA. Our priority is getting you and your men out." "Our priority," Thorne snarled, his voice shaking with a rage he could barely control, "is that we don't leave our people behind. That pilot is one of our people now. You will send that SAR team to her location, or so help me God. I will personally walk over there and find her myself." There was a long pause on the other end. The threat was not idle. A SEAL commander accusing high command of abandoning a pilot was a career-ending move for everyone involved. "Understood, Reaper." The voice finally conceded all business now. "CSAR is being rerouted to the crash site. But be advised, that area is crawling with Zamen's fighters, It's not a permissive environment. Thorne looked towards the ridge, towards the pillar of smoke that marked her grave. Then we'll make it permissive, he said. He got to his feet, his grief solidifying into a cold, hard resolve. He didn't know what they would find over there. A body, maybe. Wreckage. But they would go. They owed her that much. They owed her everything. As they began to move, a strange feeling washed over him. A nagging doubt. The A-10, the perfectly executed ambush, the diversion of her flight. It was all too clean, too well planned. And the final detail, no chute sighted. It was possible she didn't have time. But Eva Rostova was not a pilot who ran out of time. She was a pilot who made time. What if the smoke and the fire were hiding something? What if the story wasn't over? The ejection was a violent, brutal affair. One moment, Eva was in the tumbling cockpit of the Duchess. The next, she was shot into the night sky with the force of a cannon blast. The world was a spinning, disorienting blur of stars and fire. The automatic systems on the Ace's 2 ejection seat worked perfectly, separating her from the seat and deploying the small drogue chute to stabilize her fall. She had waited until the last possible second, ejecting so low to the ground that her main parachute had barely blossomed before her boots hit the rocky terrain. She landed hard, a jarring impact that sent a bolt of white-hot pain through her left ankle. She collapsed in a heap, the silk of the parachute settling around her like a shroud. For a moment, she just lay there, gasping for air, her body screaming in protest. Above her, the fireball of her plane crashing into the mountain lit up the sky. She had a broken ankle, a dislocated shoulder, and cuts and bruises she couldn't even begin to count. But she was alive. Adrenaline, cold and sharp, cut through the pain. She couldn't stay here. The explosion was a beacon, a giant "come and find me" sign for every one of Gul Zaman's fighters in a 10-mile radius. She had to move. Now. She pulled, the quick release on her harness freeing herself from the parachute. She tried to stand, but the pain in her ankle was blinding. It was definitely broken. She gritted her teeth, stifling a cry. Crying wouldn't help. Panic was a luxury she couldn't afford. She reached into her survival vest, her fingers finding the small kit inside. She pulled out a roll of medical tape and a dose of military-grade morphine. She ignored the morphine for now. She needed her, head clear. Working quickly, she unlaced her boot, pulled it off, and using 2 sticks from a withered bush as a makeshift splint, she tightly wrapped her ankle. It was a crude, agonizing process, but it would have to do. She forced the boot back on, lacing it as tight as she could to immobilize the joint. Every movement was agony, but she forced herself to think tactically. Survival was a mission just like flying. She checked her gear, a service pistol with 3 extra magazines, a knife, a signaling mirror, a small water purifier, a GPS beacon, and a survival radio. She switched on the radio, keeping the volume low. It was tuned to the emergency guard frequency. She could hear the traffic, Rodeo's anguished report of no shoot, Thorne's furious demand to reroute the search and rescue. Her heart ached for her wingman, and a flicker of surprise and gratitude went through her at the SEAL commander's words. He was looking for her. The man who had written her off was now risking a major incident to find her, but she couldn't respond. Not yet. Transmitting would give away her position to the enemy as surely as lighting a bonfire. Their direction-finding equipment would be all over any signal she sent. She had to get away from the crash site, put distance between herself and the converging enemy patrols. She had to be smart. Using a fallen branch as a crutch, she began to move. She couldn't walk, not really. It was a painful, stumbling limp, a slow, agonizing shuffle through the darkness. She headed away from the fire, away from the valley, deeper into the mountains. Her goal was higher ground, a place where she could hide, observe, and maybe, just maybe, find a defensible position to wait for rescue. The next few days blurred into a nightmare of pain, thirst, and exhaustion. The Afghan mountains were a brutal, unforgiving enemy. The days were scorching hot, the nights freezing cold. She moved mostly at night, hiding during the day in caves or under rocky overhangs, doing her best to erase any sign of her passage. Water was scarce, and she rationed the few sips her purifier could produce from stagnant, insect-ridden pools. Food was non-existent. Hunger became a dull, constant ache in her stomach. The pain from her injuries was a constant companion. Her ankle throbbed, a relentless burning fire. Her shoulder ached with every movement. But worse than the physical pain was the isolation, the crushing silence of the mountains, broken only by the wind and the distant sounds of enemy patrols. She heard their trucks, their shouts in Pashto. Twice, she had to press herself into a crevice, holding her breath as a patrol passed just yards from her hiding spot. They were hunting her, methodically, systematically. Meanwhile, back at a hastily established forward operating base, Lieutenant Commander Thorne was waging a different kind of war. He had refused to leave the area, turning the SEAL's exfiltration into a search and recovery operation. Officially, it was about recovering the sensitive technology from the A-10's wreckage. Unofficially, it was about finding Eva Rostova. The official search, conducted by the Air Force CSR teams, was fruitless. They scoured the crash site and the surrounding area and found nothing. No body, no parachute, no trace of the pilot. After 72 hours, with mounting pressure from high command and increasing enemy activity in the area, the official search was called off. Captain Eva Valkyrie Rostova was declared missing in action, presumed killed. Thorne refused to accept. She's alive, he said, his voice a low growl, to the Air Force colonel who had delivered the news. I know she is. Commander, we have searched everywhere, the colonel said, his tone a mixture of pity and frustration. There's no sign of her. The crash was catastrophic. It's time to let it go. No, Thorne said, his eyes like chips of ice. It's not. He was a man obsessed. The guilt he felt had been forged into a diamond-hard resolve. He pored over the satellite imagery, the drone footage, the after-action reports. He interviewed Rodeo for hours, going over every detail of Eva's last moments in the air. He replayed her final calm Mayday call 100 times, analyzing the tone, the cadence. It wasn't the voice of a woman who was dying. It was the voice of a woman who was working a problem. Using his own discretionary intelligence budget and calling in favors from contacts deep within the CIA, he tasked a spy satellite to make repeated low-orbit passes over the region, looking for anything out of the ordinary. A broken branch, a displaced rock, a footprint, anything. His men saw his obsession, and they shared it. They owed her their lives. They would not leave her behind. They cleaned their weapons, restocked their ammunition, and waited. They knew Thorne was planning something far outside the official rules of engagement. On the 4th day, Thorne found it. A tiny, almost imperceptible anomaly in a high-resolution satellite photo. It was a small piece of fabric, a specific shade of olive drab, caught on a thorn bush miles from the crash site. It was the same color as the standard-issue flight suit. It could have been anything. A piece of trash, a local's blanket. But it was on a direct line between the crash site and a series of caves that offered the only viable shelter in the area. It was a long shot. It was a ghost. But it was enough. Gear up, he said to his team. We're going for a walk. Eva was weakening. The lack of food and water was taking its toll. She was dizzy, her thoughts growing foggy. She had found a small, shallow cave to hide in, but she knew she couldn't stay there forever. Her radio's battery was low. She had one last chance. She had to risk a transmission. She waited until what she guessed was the middle of the night. She crawled to the mouth of the cave, the small radio in her hand. She took a deep breath. Mayday. Mayday, Mayday, she whispered, her voice a dry, hoarse rasp. This is Hog 1. Any friendly station, do you copy? She waited, her heart pounding. Nothing. She tried again. Mayday. This is Valkyrie. I am alive. I am... She never finished the sentence. A sound from below, the crunch of boots on gravel, made her freeze. She peered over the edge of her rocky ledge. Below her, not 50 yards away, was a patrol, 3 men. They were moving slowly, methodically, sweeping the area, and one of them was holding a portable direction-finding antenna. They had heard her. Her blood ran cold. She scrambled back into the cave, her mind racing. There was no other way out. It was a dead end. She drew her pistol, the cold metal a small comfort in her hand. She had 13 rounds. There were 3 of them. The math was not in her favor. She heard them getting closer, their voices low and guttural. They were at the base of the rock formation now. They had found her hiding place. She could hear them scrambling up the rocks. This was it. After everything, the ambush, the dogfight, the crash, the brutal trek through the mountains, it was going to end here, in a dark cave, with a pistol in her hand. She flattened herself against the back wall of the cave, aiming her pistol at the entrance. Her hands were shaking, not from fear, but from a deep, profound anger. She would not die easy. She would make them pay for every inch. The first shadow fell across the mouth of the cave. A figure, silhouetted against the faint starlight, began to crawl inside. Eva held her breath, her finger tightening on the trigger. She waited for the man to clear the entrance, to give her a clean shot. The figure was inside now, just a dark shape in the gloom. He was raising his rifle. This was her only chance. The darkness in the cave was absolute, a thick, suffocating blackness that swallowed all light. Eva's world had shrunk to this single, terrifying point, the silhouette of the man crawling towards her, the rifle in his hands rising to take aim. Her own pistol was rock steady now, the tremors of adrenaline replaced by an icy calm. She had 13 rounds. She would make each one count. She centered her sights on the man's chest and began to squeeze the trigger. Before she could fire, a voice cut through the silence, a low, urgent whisper in perfect, unaccented English. "Captain Rostova, do not shoot. We're friendly." Eva froze, her finger hovering a hair's breadth from firing. The voice was familiar. She had heard it in the briefing room, laced with arrogance and dismissal. She had heard it on the radio, raw, with desperation. It was Thorn. The figure in the entrance wasn't one of Zayman's fighters. It was a Navy SEAL, a wave of relief so powerful it almost made her pass out washed over her. She lowered the pistol, her arm suddenly feeling as heavy as lead. "Took you long enough, Commander," she rasped, her voice cracking from dehydration. Thorn moved into the cave, followed by 2 of his men. He switched on a low-intensity red light on his helmet, illuminating the small space. He saw her then, really saw her for the first time. She was pale, gaunt, her face etched with exhaustion and pain. Her flight suit was torn, and a crude splint was visible on her ankle. But her eyes, even in the dim light, were clear and defiant. She was hurt, but she was not broken. "I told them you were alive," he said, his voice thick with an emotion she couldn't quite place. It sounded like relief, and something else. "Awe. Glad one of us was so confident," she replied, a weak smile touching her lips. "We picked up your transmission," Gator, his second-in-command, explained, as he began to check her injuries with practiced efficiency. "Barely a whisper, but we got a bearing. Just in time, too. There's another enemy patrol about a click down the canyon, and they're moving this way." Thorn knelt beside her. "Can you walk?" Eva shook her head. "Not without slowing you down. This ankle is shot." Thorn didn't hesitate. "Doesn't matter." He turned to his other man. "Get her on my back. We're leaving. Now." Getting her out of the cave and onto Thorn's back was a clumsy, painful process, but the SEALs were gentle and efficient. As Thorn stood up with Eva clinging to his back, she felt a strange sense of dissonance. This man, this mountain of a soldier who had looked through her just days ago, was now carrying her, his movements careful, his focus entirely on her safety. The journey back to their extraction point was a tense, grueling affair. They moved through the darkness, a small, silent unit deep in enemy territory. Thorn, carrying Eva's weight in addition to his own heavy combat load, never slowed, never faltered. He moved with a steady, relentless pace, his men forming a protective perimeter around them. They had one close call, a tense 5 minutes spent hiding in a ditch as the patrol gator had mentioned passed by on the ridge above them, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. Ava held her breath, her face pressed against Thorne's back, feeling the steady, calm rhythm of his breathing. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they reached the designated extraction point, a small, flat clearing on a high plateau. Thorne gently lowered her to the ground. "Choppers are 5 minutes out," he said. As they waited, a comfortable silence settled between them. The animosity from the briefing room felt like it had happened a lifetime ago, to two different people. "Why?" Eva finally asked, her voice quiet. "Why did you come back? The official search was over. They wrote me off." Thorne looked at her, his expression serious in the faint starlight. "In the teams, we have a saying," he said, his voice a low rumble. "No one gets left behind. You flew through hell for us. You became one of us the moment you nosed that plane into my valley. We don't leave our people. Ever." He paused, and for the first time, she saw something vulnerable in his eyes. "I was wrong about you, Captain. About your plane. I was arrogant, and I was a fool. You saved my entire team. I won't forget that." The whine of helicopter rotors grew in the distance, and soon 2 MH-60s were settling onto the plateau, their rotor wash kicking up a storm of dust and debris. The SEALs helped her aboard, and as the helicopter lifted off, carrying them away from the dark, unforgiving mountains, Eva looked back one last time. The story, however, was not over. Back at Bagram, the debriefing was an intense, high-level affair. Generals and intelligence officers wanted answers. How did a SEAL team walk into a perfectly executed ambush? Where did a backwater warlord get a sophisticated SA-13 missile system? Thorne, his face grim, laid it all out. The flawed intel. The trap. But it was Eva who provided the final, crucial piece of the puzzle. "The diversion!" she said, her voice clear and strong despite her fatigue. She was in a wheelchair, her leg in a cast, but her presence commanded the room. "The convoy I was ordered to intercept. It was a ghost. 3 trucks on a road to nowhere. The timing was too perfect. It was meant to pull our air support away at the exact moment the SEALs were most vulnerable." An intelligence analyst in the corner of the room, who had been furiously typing on a laptop, suddenly looked up, his face pale. "Captain, can you confirm the time you received the order to divert?" Eva confirmed the time. The analyst's fingers flew across the keyboard. "My God," he whispered. He looked at the general in charge. "Sir, the order to divert hog flight didn't come from this command. The transmission logs show it was a spoofed signal routed through a compromised satellite uplink. It originated from inside this base." The room went silent. A traitor. The ambush wasn't just the result of bad intel. It was a deliberate, calculated betrayal. Someone on the inside had fed the SEALs to the enemy and tried to ensure their only lifeline was miles away. The investigation that followed was swift and brutal. The traitor was a high-ranking communications officer, a man with massive gambling debts who had been selling information to a foreign intelligence service. The ambush was meant to kill the SEALs and capture the Pakistani physicist Dr. Thorne, who was never actually in the compound. The warlord, Zaman, was merely a pawn, paid to set the trap. The officer confessed everything. He had never counted on a stubborn A-10 pilot defying orders. He never counted on her flying a crippled plane into an impossible fight. He never counted on her surviving. Eva's act of insubordination was quietly erased from the record. In its place, a commendation for valor was entered, and the Distinguished Flying Cross was pinned to her uniform in a private ceremony. Weeks later, her ankle healed, Ava walked back onto the flight line. A new A-10 Thunderbolt II was waiting for her, its paint fresh, its arsenal fully loaded. As she placed her hand on its cold, metal skin, she saw a figure approaching. It was Thorne, out of his combat gear, dressed in simple khakis and a polo shirt. He looked different, less like a weapon and more like a man. He stopped beside her, looking at the plane. They gave you a new one, he said. They did, she replied. But I'll miss the Duchess. She was a hell of a plane, Thorne said quietly. He turned to her. I'm heading back stateside tomorrow. My team is getting some much-needed downtime. He held out his hand. If you're ever in Virginia Beach, the first beer is on me. Eva smiled and shook his hand. His grip was firm, respectful. I might just take you up on that, Commander. Marcus, he corrected her. Call me Marcus. Eva, she replied. He nodded, gave the warthog one last appreciative look, and walked away. Eva watched him go, then turned her attention back to her plane. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue. It was a good day to fly. She had faced down arrogance, betrayal, and death itself. She had earned her place, not with words, but with actions. She had proven that courage and determination were more powerful than any weapon, and that in the darkest of nights, sometimes the only way out is to burn a path through. And there was no better torch for the job than the one she was about to fly.